Hi everyone, Samir and Sumit here, and welcome back to our F1 podcast.
Today we'll be talking about the 2024 Spanish Grand Prix.
Yeah, and this was certainly another interesting race as we've seen so far this season. It's not just Max Verstappen and Red Bull, but we've seen McLaren have got their form together, Mercedes, Ferrari, and this was another weekend where it wasn't just Verstappen being challenged.
Like going into this weekend, I particularly was really excited because McLaren were on a resurgence and
Yeah,
Mercedes have always gone well around Spain, like we've seen in the past. They got that double podium here last year despite their car being pretty
yeah,
bad for their standards.
yeah.
So I was really looking forward to this weekend.
Yeah, and also Sainz, with it being his home Grand Prix, he would obviously want to impress. So maybe that could bring Ferrari into the mix as well.
hmm So going into FP1 now, we immediately saw McLaren straight away
Hmm.
on the pace. Lando Norris finished the session P1,
Yeah,
and he just looked pretty in sync with his McLaren. Honestly, I mean, the
yeah.
McLaren seemed to be riding around Barcelona pretty well, and he looked really fast in his hands, despite
Hmm.
hitting the gravel on the exit of turn 12. He managed to like put in really good laps together, and he was
Yeah,
looking pretty good.
yeah. It would be interesting to see how he would do over the this course of the weekend because McLaren obviously have had massive upgrades to their cars. They've been looking quick so far ever since Norris won in Miami. They were quick in Canada and Imola as well. So hopefully they could be quick here in Barcelona and put the pressure on Verstappen. But Verstappen was right up there behind Norris. He was just 2/1000s behind Norris, or 2/100ths behind him. So he was definitely in the mix as well.
Yeah, despite him being up there though, like both Red Bulls,
Yeah.
especially Perez, though, seem to be struggling
Mhm.
quite a lot. And a lot of teams this weekend brought huge upgrades to
Yeah.
Barcelona. That was a big headline going into this weekend. And so
Yeah.
it'd be FP1 especially was really like new waters for everyone testing out their
Yeah.
upgrades and stuff. And we were eager to see how it went. And for the Red Bull family cars, especially RB, it looked like those
Mhm.
upgrades weren't necessarily working because both Sonoda and Ricardo seem to be struggling with their new upgrades.
Yeah. They also Aston Martin or a team that kind of have been plateauing recently because they haven't been bringing too many upgrades. So other teams around them have been bringing massive upgrades. So it would be interesting to see where Aston Martin finish in the mix throughout this weekend because while they were very strong at the beginning of this year and especially last year, they've kind of fallen off recently. Even like not just Stroll but Alonso as well is struggling. So Aston Martin really need to get their form together if they want to fight for that or fight for the top spots in the constructors championship, probably like fourth or fifth, because I think the top three is gonna be, even top four is gonna be Mercedes, McLaren, Red Bull, Ferrari.
Especially now that Alpine and Williams after
Yeah,
Canada are on the resurgence, it'd be
yeah,
interesting to see what Williams and Alpine could do in their battle for like the bottom spots of the constructors championship.
yeah. Another team that was struggling a little bit were the two Saubers, who have been kind of struggling all season with Bottas and Joe. So it was another weekend to see where if they would not just be running at the back of the field like they did in Monaco or Canada.
hmm And finally, another like thing going into this weekend or during FP1, it was announced that
Yeah,
at Alpine the return of Flavio Briatore,
yeah,
like former Benetton and Renault team
yeah.
principal, that huge figure in the controversial
Mhm.
crash gate of Singapore 2008 was returning as an
Yeah,
executive advisor for the team.
yeah,
So it'd be interesting to see how he would like kind of change that dynamic. Obviously, he knows how to win world championships with that Enstone
yeah,
team. So I'm like excited to see it, but like it's gonna be weird because he was like banned from F1 for so long.
yeah. But it's a huge weekend for a lot of drivers. Ocon needs to impress. Sargent needs to like. I mean, I don't know. It might be a little bit too late for him, but we'll still see. Carlos Sainz again is just trying to show himself to the top teams. At this point, I think it's just even. I don't really know if he has a seat at a top team anymore. I think it's just narrowed down to Alpine, who just entered the race for him. Williams and Who else was it?
Like
And
everyone, like
yeah.
Audi, Haas.
Oh yeah, Audi. Yeah. I mean, obviously, we all know he wants that Mercedes seat, but I think they're gonna give it to Antonelli.
Yeah. So in the end, it was Norris first, then Verstappen, Sainz, Russell, Perez in fifth, then Piastri, Hamilton, Ocon in the top 10, Alonso and Albon rounding out the top 10.
Yeah. So now going on into FP2, then it was actually a really good showing from the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, he's super successful in Barcelona, taking so many wins here and many more podiums. So it was no surprise that he was gonna do well, but we didn't know how well, and hopefully he could continue this pace on into qualifying in the race. But he was absolutely flying, and he was beating and actually Max Verstappen wasn't even up there in the top three. He was fourth, because or he was actually fifth because Gasly was up there in P4 for some reason. So Alpine were actually looking pretty quick. But you had three constructors in Mercedes, Ferrari, and McLaren up there in the top three. So there was the margins were so narrow for them, and it was really nice to see this level of competition come back into F1 instead of just one car and one driver being at the very front. Now you had four constructors all separated with less than a tenth.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a lot of drivers were struggling this
Yeah,
session though, because obviously the new upgrades. Now was the time to like test and push that limit. Now once you've
yeah,
like done the exploratory stuff in FP1, and so we saw a lot of drivers like Verstappen, Norris
mm-mm.
running wide and like hopefully not damaging. Although I think Norris damaged his McLaren when he went wide onto the exit curbing of turn 9.
Yeah,
So that hopefully didn't cause too much damage for him. But a lot of drivers were pushing this session, and this session really found out. Like we saw Verstappen just confirming he was struggling more. We confirmed that Mercedes, after like being fast in previous years, were still looking really fast
yeah.
at this session, and McLaren was still right up there as well.
Yeah, we saw Carlos Sainz struggling a little bit in his Ferrari, struggling with understeer in his car. But he was also that was like towards the beginning, but he was also looking pretty quick towards the end of the session as he finished off in P2, just 5 thousandths off the 2 thousandths off the Mercedes of Lewis Hamilton. So hopefully Sainz could put on a show in qualifying for his fans and achieve his first podium in Spain.
So at the end of the session, it was Hamilton first, then Carlos Sainz, Lando Norris, Pierre Gasly fourth in the Alpine, then Max Verstappen was fifth, Leclerc was sixth, then came Piastri, Russell, Ocon, and Valtteri Bottas in the Sauber,
Hmm.
rounding out the top 10. So two Alpines in the top 10. The RBs were way down. We had Bottas up there, and then we
Yeah.
had Sergio Perez as well, not even in the top 10.
Yeah, so now going on into FP3 and the final chance for the drivers to tune their setups and get them right for qualifying, and it was Carlos Sainz who actually topped the times. So it was now looking it went from really good to like even better for Sainz as he went from second to first now just before qualifying. That would be exactly what he needed and what he would want to see going into qualifying, and also what his Spanish fans would love to see because he would love to take a pole position here. And I hate to say it, but what might be the last time in a long while he comes to Spain
Yeah.
in a competitive car.
Hmm. So Sainz will definitely, like he said it out loud, he has a race-winning car this year and he wants to maximize it because he doesn't know what he's going to get in the future.
Yeah,
And speaking of those race-winning cars, we saw Leclerc and Norris, two race winners this year, have
yeah,
a really unusual like collision in practice itself.
yeah,
It was because Leclerc thought Norris was in his way on turn 6, and so Norris made his frustrations apparent, or Leclerc made his frustrations apparent to Norris by turning into him, and they collided. It was like Vettel and
yeah.
Hamilton in
Oh
2017
yeah,
in Baku, and Norris said his whole front wing was damaged, and Leclerc ended up just getting a reprimand for it. But like
yeah,
obviously those two are really good friends, but tempers were flying high.
yeah. But we saw Oscar Piastri struggle a little bit in that new or right before what used to be the last chicane, that very long right-hander where you have so much understeer. It feels like Piastri was struggling a little bit, and that would be signs to come, I guess, for qualifying, which would that would come to play for him later on in qualifying. But Max Verstappen, we saw in his Red Bull, was only again in fourth, albeit though the top four were separated by less than a tenth. So Verstappen, we know that he can, even though he's down in practice, he can just pull a lap out of nowhere and take pole position by like big margins when he has to. So just because he was fourth in practice, it didn't mean that he would definitely not be in the fight for front row or pole come qualifying.
Yeah, I mean, but Max would know he has to push hard because the
Yeah,
Mercedes were in form. Oscar Piastri looked pretty well despite running
yeah,
wide on the exit of, I think it was turn 12. And
yeah,
so and now the Alpines were looking competitive in the midfield. So just a lot of
yeah,
competitive battles everywhere that meant that FP3 was really busy because this was the last time um they could go without like having it any repercussions because come qualifying now you have to do it, and one small error would send you way back with how tight it's becoming now.
yeah. And Alpine just want to shout them out because they've actually like found some really good pace in their car compared to where they were at the beginning of the season, where they were like absolutely like trash, and now they're fighting for the lower points position. So it's a huge step up to where they were at the beginning of the year.
And finally, we saw like another weird collision in FP2. It was near the same corners. It was at turn 5 this time. We saw Lewis Hamilton was ahead of Lance Stroll, and so Hamilton saw him at the last moment, and so he got out of the way, and it
Hmm.
looked like fine initially, and but Stroll like complained about the dirty air and stuff, which makes sense. But then
Yeah,
Stroll like pushed Hamilton wide and like they made contact as well. And
yeah.
so I think it was just unnecessary from Stroll and same unnecessary from Leclerc as well because you don't want contact in free practice. That's just
It was
unnecessary.
Hamilton. Yeah.
No, but Leclerc hit
Oh yeah,
Norris as well.
yeah.
So um definitely unsportsmanlike in that regard, but nevertheless tempers fly. But anyway, ending this free practice session now, it was Carlos Sainz first, then came Norris, Leclerc, Verstappen, the two Mercedes, Russell ahead of Hamilton, Perez finally in the top 10, then Albon, Alonso, and Piastri rounding out the top 10.
Yeah, an interesting to point thing to point out is that RB like they kind of just remodeled their entire car for this weekend in terms of how many upgrades they brought. But in FP3, both RBs were down in 16th and 18th, so
Mm,
their upgrades so far are looking like downgrades. But of course, we'd have
yeah.
to see come qualifying. But so far, just not the results that they would be expecting with the amount of upgrades that they brought.
Of course, yeah, especially like coming off the back of points in Canada, and they were
Yeah.
looking so in form. Now all of a sudden,
Hmm.
this looks like a reset back to Bahrain.
Yeah.
So
So
going into Q1 now, we saw drivers completing their final laps, and Daniel Ricciardo just confirming the lack of pace of RB as he only managed to go 15th, and other drivers behind were improving. As Fernando
hmm,
Alonso went up to ninth, Ricciardo was out of qualifying.
yeah,
Gasly managed to have a great lap to go P10 just ahead of his teammate. Stroll only went 14th. He was way behind Fernando Alonso. Yuki Tsunoda then as well in the other RB only went to 16th. So shame for RB as both of them out in Q1 with these new upgrades per se, like you said, more like downgrades.
yeah,
Hulkenberg got himself out of the bottom five at the expense of his teammate, and we waited for Logan Sargent, and Sargent crossed the line. He stayed P20, and it was an interesting thing. Like apparently, this was the first time in a while Sargent had
yeah,
equal cars, but I was also hearing that apparently they actually weren't, and Austria would be the actual race where he had equal cars.
yeah.
So I mean, equal cars or not, the result stayed the same. Sargent was 20th.
Hmm.
Albon was on the back row in 19th. Then came Ricardo 18th, Sonoda 17th, and Magnussen 16th.
Yeah. So RB confirming that their upgrades are downgrades. Williams just for some reason are now in the mud again. And Aston Martin still like they got through, but I don't think they would be able to get through to Q3 at least. with
Yeah,
the amount
and
of pace, but who knows?
and with Williams, it's unfortunate because like it's not just Sargent who was doing bad. Like
Yeah.
Albon was there to sort of confirm that Williams was doing bad, RB was bad, so it gave Aston Martin a break. But like you said,
And
I don't.
also kick Sauber too. They were able to get both cars into Q2.
Yeah, they were running pretty well, and
Yeah.
so maybe this would be an upturn in fortunes for them.
Yeah, so now going into Q2, more drivers were finishing their laps at towards the end of the session, and Gasly went up into P7. So as it stood, both Alpines were on en route to go into Q3, and Sergio Perez went up into P7, knocking the Alpines down. And Alonso behind on his lap was improving, looking to impress in front of his home crowd, but he only went up into P11. So he was out in Q2 for Aston Martin, and that was a huge surprise considering how good Aston Martin used to be. Now they are out, and for Alonso to be out in his home race, that's not at all what he wanted to do. And George Russell went up into P3. He and Hamilton were up there in the top three, so both Mercedes would be looking to put the pressure on Max Verstappen come Q3.
hmm So going into Q3 now, on the first set of runs, Verstappen was absolutely flying on his new tires.
Hmm.
Perez was on his old tires, and it was evident because Verstappen had a time almost 1.5 seconds quicker than his
Yeah,
teammate in the same car. Definitely tires playing a big part there. Tire difference. Carlos Sainz went up to P2. He was about 3 tenths behind Max Verstappen. Esteban Ocon actually in his Alpine on old tires went ahead of
hmm,
Sergio Perez, who
yeah,
was also on old tires. So Ocon in the Alpine ahead of Perez in the Red Bull. So that was
yeah,
a really good lap from Esteban Ocon, but obviously they would have to wait until they got new tires. Piastri, who was looking good early in the weekend, pretty had a pretty bad first lap as he went about 6 tenths behind Carlos Sainz. Lando Norris went onto the front row, then a tenth off Verstappen. Then came
hmm,
Leclerc and the two Mercedes. Leclerc went fourth, and then Hamilton went third, and Russell went fourth.
yeah. So far with these first set of runs, Verstappen once again being the main man up there, but Norris looking like now. At first we thought it was be the two Mercedes, but now Norris put himself into the mix there. And so as the driver started the last set of runs, we saw Leclerc only manage the front row, and same with Carlos Sainz, who had gone to the front row previously. But then Leclerc went up and beat his teammate, and now we saw more drivers improving behind, such as Max Verstappen, who looked like he would set an absolute benchmark of a time, and he did with a 111.4, 3 tenths quicker uh than Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. Piastri had to abort his time because he just understeered wide off into turn 12 and completely ruined his lap as he just went off into the gravel.
And his first lap was deleted as well
Yeah,
for
so he
track
had no
limits, so he,
time
he had
set.
nothing. Highly uncharacteristic from
Yeah,
Piastri, who's driven so well in his 2 seasons in F1 so far.
yeah. Farther behind, we saw Lando Norris was actually improving a lot. He gone fastest in the middle sector. So as it stood, he was a tenth up on Verstappen. So and Hamilton also wasn't far behind. He was just 9 thousandths off. Verst 900ths off Verstappen's time. Russell was a tenth off Verstappen's time. So we had three cars all challenging Verstappen. And as Lando Norris came around the final corner and crossed the line, he actually took pole position off Max Verstappen by 2/100ths of a second. Norris was on pole provisionally unless Hamilton could do something about it, but he only went up into third, and Russell actually couldn't beat his teammate. So Hamilton outqualified Russell for the first time in a long time, but Lando Norris took pole position away from Max Verstappen. And
Incredible lap.
it was a really good lap from Norris, and McLaren was super happy, and now we would just have to see if he could convert it into the race win.
So it was Lando Norris and Max Verstappen on the front row, the two Mercedes, Hamilton and Russell on the second row. Then came the two Ferraris, Leclerc
Yeah,
and Sainz on the third row, followed by Gasly, Perez, and Ocon. So the Alpine split by a Red Bull is a pretty impressive result for them. Then came Oscar Piastri, who would be really, really disappointed and kicking himself with that 10th
yeah.
finish.
I mean, a poor qualifying from Sergio Perez. At least Piastri didn't complete a lap, but Perez completed a lap and he was still all the way down there. So he definitely has a lot of work cut out for him on Sunday to do. But now, as we went on to the main Grand Prix, the main point would be to see whether Norris could displace Verstappen and take on his second win of the season in what has so far become this Norris versus Verstappen fight that we've seen the last three races. So as the lights went out, it was initially looked like it was going to be a good start from Norris, but then we saw Verstappen get in the second phase get a really good start, and Norris just didn't have enough traction coming off the line, and now he had to leave space for Verstappen, who would now have the inside line. And we thought that Verstappen would send it down the inside, but it was three wide as Russell came around the outside and broke so much later than everyone. And of course, because he was on the outside, he was on the racing line, so he just swooped around everyone and took the lead ahead of Verstappen, and Norris dropped back to third.
Yeah, it was like what Verstappen did in Mexico
Yeah,
2021.
yeah,
It's a great start from George Russell and Lando Norris, again, just like having poor starts. And
yeah,
this potentially could be dangerous as he looked to try to get his
yeah.
second win in his career and his second win of the season. Verstappen, though, managed to take that place off Lando Norris, but unexpectedly now he had his work cut out as he had to chase after George Russell.
Yeah,
Meanwhile, in the background, the two Alpines were getting into it as Piastri couldn't find a way past. In the background, Fernando Alonso had to go off the road and rejoin right behind
yeah,
Sergio Perez, who didn't have a great start at all. He was still behind the Alpines and the Ferraris. And in the back, we saw by the way, Albon had started from the pit lane for setup
yeah.
changes. And in the back, we saw Sonoda, who crawled off the line. Had a really bad start, get
Mm-hmm.
past Ricardo and Sargent, and as well, he was on the back of the Haas and the Sauber. Ricardo had dropped back behind Sargent, and so it was all kicking off on this first
Yeah.
lap.
So as we went on to lap three now already, Verstappen was putting the pressure on George Russell, and into turn one, Verstappen went around the outside of George Russell and he took the lead of the Spanish Grand Prix, and now he would look to just bolt off into the distance because Russell in the Mercedes couldn't really do anything about it. And we also saw the two Ferraris get extremely close together. We saw it was Sainz trying to go around the outside of his teammate Leclerc, and they touched a little bit, and Sainz actually had to go off the road, and that would not go down well at Ferrari, of course, between the two teammates who spent more time fighting each other than actually fighting the other cars around them.
A lot of people like got mad at Charles for like what he was saying after the race
Yeah.
about this. Like he was complaining. I mean, I honestly don't see any other I don't see any reason to not be
Hmm.
mad at Carlos in this situation. In my opinion, it looked like
Yeah.
Leclerc was fully side by side with him at the apex of turn one, and Carlos just cut the door aggressively. It was like Carlos was going for the apex when Leclerc was right there,
Hmm.
and so
Yeah.
I just don't think it was smart positioning from Carlos Sainz. But nevertheless, it affected their race not too much, but still like slight damage to the car.
Yeah, and in terms of how much time they were losing to each other, it wasn't a good situation to be in. But going on now onto lap 16, Russell was one of the first people to make pit stops as he slammed on the brakes and came into the pits to change onto medium tires. It was a little bit slow, but also
A
Sainz
little bit, it
came.
was very
Yeah, it was really slow, but it was 5.3 seconds, which was very slow. And Sainz with a 2.2 second stop, but luckily they were going a little bit wheel to wheel down the pit lane. But then eventually Russell, he just had a few meters advantage and was able to get out ahead.
yeah. And then so we saw Norris have a conversation with his engineer
Hmm.
about whether he wanted to try to cover that off, but Norris had the
Yeah,
full mentality of he wanted to go get past Max Verstappen. He was not there to finish second. He was clearly
yeah,
there to finish first and try to
yeah,
make amends for his bad start. And going on to lap 19, we saw a battle further down. We saw Carlos Sainz and Lewis Hamilton
hmm,
have a battle. Really good racing. Hamilton squeezed Sainz off the track in the
yeah,
symbolic way that he was gonna squeeze him out of his seat in 2025.
yeah.
It was a really good racing. But Sainz complained that he got forced off, which makes sense. But Hamilton all four wheels on the track. There was no investigation necessary.
Yeah, Science was complaining once again on the radio. I don't know, is it just me or does it seem like that Science complains a lot on the radio when things aren't really going his way?
It seems like it for me, but I mean, he might just not be able to deal with the adrenaline as
Yeah.
well as other people. Going on to lap 24, then Lando Norris, who took the soft tires a really long way, longer than anyone expected, changed onto the medium tires. Leclerc ended up taking the lead of the race because he hadn't pitted yet. And Norris's main goal was now he was behind both Mercedes and Carlos Sainz, so Norris had his work cut out for him as he was on obviously much newer and therefore faster tires. He had to quickly get past Sainz and the two Mercedes. Hope he had enough tires to get up to Verstappen and then pass him.
Yeah, so by lap 28 now, he was making moves on Lewis Hamilton or trying to, but we saw Oscar Piastri get past Sergio Perez like with really good like really easily. He was able to get past after he got past the Alpines, but then he would look to get the car in front of him, but Norris was now 1.4 seconds behind Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes, so he would try to get past. And one thing crucial for his strategy was that he had to get past quickly if he wanted to get to Verstappen before his tires also dropped off. He got past Hamilton quickly, but now moving on to lap 35, he was looking to get past George Russell, and he did a beautiful switchback at turn 2, and they were going wheel to wheel through the long right-hander of turn 3. But then Norris looked to get ahead, but then Russell went around the outside and actually to be fair, he gave a really good fight with Norris and was able to go all the way around the outside and put in a really good effort to try to defend Lando. But eventually, with the better traction due to the fresher tires, Norris was able to just be breeze past in the corner.
Yeah, and so that was really good racing, but obviously hurt
Yeah,
Norris a lot because he used much more tires than he needed to.
yeah.
Meanwhile, in the bottom, we didn't see a lot of progress from Sergio Perez. We saw the
Mm-hmm.
Alpines making good ground, and then right at the tail end, we saw the Williams struggling hard as well as the RBs.
Yeah,
Although Ricardo in the RBs in Ricardo's hands looked like he was still capable of making like good overtakes. We saw
yeah.
Ricardo making overtakes throughout the race.
Yeah, moving on to lap 52, we saw Lewis Hamilton make his way past George Russell and like kind of the opposite of what we saw in Canada. This time Hamilton was on the better tires and he was able to get past Russell and up into a podium taking position, and Russell would definitely have questions as to why he was put on the hards and why Hamilton was put on the softs. But as then moving on to lap 55, we saw the two Ferraris were fighting each other once again for the fifth and sixth place, and Leclerc was able to get past Carlos Sainz because Leclerc was on the softs and Sainz was on the hards. So Sainz would be asking the same questions that Russell would be asking the team as to why they were on different tires.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, Sainz this time doing a good job of getting out of his teammates' way instead of
Yeah,
wasting any more time. I think he slowly realized that there was no point in fighting because they were just gonna lose more time with each other.
yeah,
And then going on to lap, I don't know what lap it was actually, but we saw lap 59. I think Albon had a pretty scary moment at turn 4
yeah,
where he just lost the rear end and he just went really wide and into the gravel and lost a huge load of time. And I don't know if it was wind or anything because he said it was really strange and he wanted to know
yeah.
what happened. So I mean, I don't know if it's driver error, wind, engine braking, whatever it was. It cost him a whole lot of time.
Yeah, and he was like really upset at the team when the team told him everything looked fine. Like he was saying, "No, don't just say that. Everything is clearly not fine."
Mhm.
So like he was definitely really annoyed about that because he lost a lot of positions due to it, and he fell back behind the Haas of Kevin Magnussen.
So going on to lap 66 now, Max Verstappen once again proving why he's the class of the field, despite Norris clearly having the quicker car.
Mhm.
Max Verstappen capitalized on everything, and he took another win at the Spanish Grand Prix. It was his third win at this track, third or fourth win at this track.
Third one.
Third win. Wait, who won in 20? He won in 23, right? And
Yeah.
then 22, he won. So it was his fourth
Oh,
win because
fourth win. Yeah.
16, 22, and 23, and now 24. But really great result from Verstappen. Then Lando Norris, who was always visibly frustrated after this race because he
Yeah.
made the error and he couldn't win as a result of that. So just another error from Lando Norris. Then Lewis Hamilton came on the podium for his first podium of 2024, and again Mercedes a third and fourth here. They were going really well around Barcelona again. Then came the two Ferraris, fifth and sixth, Leclerc ahead of Sainz, and Leclerc would both of them were definitely really annoyed with that, especially Sainz, who wouldn't
Yeah.
know whether he was be have the potential to stand on the podium here ever again. Then came Piastri seventh and Perez eighth, both disappointing results for them when you look at like the performance of their car respective to their teammates. Then
Yeah.
came Gasly ninth and Ocon 10th again. So another double points finish for Alpine, proving their resurgence.
Yeah. And this was a very interesting race because it kind of shifted the dynamic in what we've seen with Lando Norris because like a few races ago he would be celebrating with P2, but now he was disappointed with P2, so that just shows where he and McLaren are in terms of their mindset, in terms of their car. Now they want to be fighting for wins and fighting for victories instead of just podiums.
Hmm. So it was a really interesting race. I really enjoyed it. I think we learned a
Yeah.
lot from it, and I think it definitely, like you said, changes the dynamic of like not just like the front, like not just North, but also the dynamic at like the front of the grid, the back, and like everywhere. Just kind of how the different teams are gonna be. Like, will we see McLaren continuously doing great? Will we see RB pick up like kind of revert their car essentially? Are
Hmm.
Williams still gonna be struggling? Are Alpine gonna finally be where they were like years ago, like a couple of years ago? So
Yeah.
it was definitely a thought provoking race.
Yeah, and this with the second place with Norris, it moved him into second place in the drivers' championship as well, ahead of Leclerc just by 2 points. But it was pretty cool to see Norris up there in P2. But we would just have to see and find out if he could hold on to it for the rest of the season. But that's pretty much it for this episode of the Spanish Grand Prix. And thank you for listening to this episode of our podcast. And be sure to join us next time as we take a look at the 2024 Austrian Grand Prix. Thank you.